Okay. So the purpose of the call today is this is our third member call since we officially kicked off earlier in the year, and it's to continue bringing people together to inspire each other, to connect with the movement, to connect with each other, and have open discussions around the wellbeing economy movement. WEAll Australia is part of the global WEAll Hub, the global WEAll Economy Alliance, Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is broadly around building and advocating for an economy in service of life. For those of you who've been on previous calls, you'll know that we spent quite a bit of time working on a one-page charter, which is this thing here, and it basically sets out the vision, the mission, the principles and the strategic goals of WEAll Australia, which very closely mirror those of WEAll Global, but have been adapted to an Australian context. And broadly, the vision is an Australia that is fair and ecologically healthy and is served by an economy that supports the wellbeing of all. I'll just quickly give a shout out to some of the co-conveners on the call. There are quite a number that are away, but we've got Esther Coe from who works for Centre for Policy Development, Meg Brodie, who also works for VCOS, Victorian Council of Social Services. I'm not sure if Mike Salvaris is on the call yet.
Yes, I am.
Oh, good. We've got Mike here, who's spearheading the Australian National Development Index, which is a fantastic suite of indicators to try to measure wellbeing economy. I can't see all the participants, so I'm not sure if Lily Spencer's managed to make it today, or if she's an apology. I think she might not be here. And myself, my name's Saul Cresswell. I work for the Shire of Augusta Margaret River as a Sustainable Economy Officer. I've spent the last 5 years looking at ways to bring a broader focus of sustainability into our economic development processes. I've previously worked in ecotourism, sustainability education, and land restoration, all things that are broadly aligned with building a wellbeing economy. So it's an absolute thrill to be on this call with kindred spirits. Just briefly, the meeting structure, I'll pass over to Mike shortly, who will just give a brief overview of the recent wellbeing conference that was in Canberra. Maybe he'll throw in a few bits of pertinent information about the wellbeing economy movement at the moment around the country, and we'll allow a few minutes to very briefly have people pop in what we're calling a popcorn session, anything that they think is really relevant and timely that we all need to know about. But we'll need to keep that quite short, so just keep it to a couple of key messages if you've got something that you really want to share, and throw a link in the chat. At the end of the meeting, after our guest speaker has spoken, there might be time to dive further into some of those things. But yeah, we'll keep that popcorn session pretty short, and then I'll introduce Megan Burkett, who's our guest speaker for the day. Then there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers after that, and then we'll see how much time we've got and how we want to approach our general discussion. If the group's still quite big, who wants to hang on after the guest speaker's finished, we might utilise breakout rooms. We're still settling on the best approach for these meetings. It's our third one, like I said, and everyone's been a little bit different, so very, very open to suggestions on the best way to run these. So I'll pass over to Mike now to give us an overview of the Wellbeing Conference.
Thank you, Saul, and thank you and welcome to all of our kindred spirits. Lovely to have you all together. I'm going to give a quick review of the national conference we had at the end of June last year, and then I'm going to quickly go through activities in various states and in the community around wellbeing and the development of wellbeing frameworks and the wellbeing economy. The conference was held in Canberra on 26-28 June. I think we got about 220 attendees, of whom 100 were in person. And if you didn't get there or you were interested, the papers are now available online. The key speakers included Ken Henry, Julianne Schultz, Mary Catherine Jacobs from the UK, Symmetrica Group, who do social values measurement, and it was good to see representatives from state governments and treasuries. I think the conference was a great success. I certainly enjoyed it hugely, and I think most people I spoke to did. It brought together a good range of people, and the topics were broad. Ken Henry gave a wonderful speech on the environment and the economy. We looked at embedding wellbeing into government, wellbeing and resilience in regional Australia, Indigenous wellbeing, the relationship between wellbeing and democracy, and we gave a lot of thought to the future wellbeing agenda for Australia. How are we going to build wellbeing into policy and action, which was the title of the conference. I think everyone was keen to see this as an annual conference and bringing together more and more people, and there was a lot of optimism about our capacity to get funding for it. So quickly to national and state activities. I suppose the key development nationally was a statement from the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, about measuring what matters. It didn't leave me hugely impressed, I must say, because it was essentially saying that responsibility for this was being passed over to the ABS and it would now be updated only every 3 years. But some people see that as progress of the sort, even if we expect it to be slow. In state activities, there is quite a lot happening, albeit it's happening primarily from treasuries, and that carries with it some risks, which I'll quickly mention. The ACT is probably leading the pack in embedding wellbeing and developing wellbeing impact assessments, which is quite exciting. The New South Wales government has announced a parliamentary Public Accounts Committee inquiry into wellbeing frameworks. In Western Australia, I'm working with the Western Australian government on a 5-year project to develop a comprehensive wellbeing index for WA, which is very strongly community-based. Tasmania has made a commitment in 2022 to a wellbeing framework. Hasn't moved it a lot at the state government level, but work is being done at the University of Tasmania and the Institute for Social Change on what's called the Good Life Initiative. South Australia has a new government, and that government has made quite a strong commitment to wellbeing in the economy in the statement by the Premier. And there's also work on wellbeing frameworks being done by the State Health Department. Victoria, which should be more progressive, since I come from Victoria, I have to say that, has been a bit of a laggard. The Treasurer has made promises from time to time to make the budget more wellbeing friendly, but not delivered a great deal yet. And there's a focus on cost of living crisis, which seems to shade out a lot of this work. But strong work has been done by 2 of our key community organisations, Vic Health and VCOS. And I must say that I think the state network of councils of social services has been really carrying a lot of work from the community's perspective. Just to end up with a quick overview, we are facing this thing called the cost of living crisis, and it is, as I said, being used, I think, partly as an excuse, or at least a cause to defer action on wellbeing. Our argument has got to be wellbeing economies and wellbeing frameworks are not a diversion from a cost of living crisis. They are the answer to it. And I think that's critical for us all to bear in mind. Thanks, Saul.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Great wrap up. Does anyone urgently want to add anything else in the mix before I hand over to our guest speaker? Yes, Warwick.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in a comment about what Mike said about the national framework, which was close but not quite on the money, Mike. So what they're doing is they've moved the dashboard, the indicators part of the Measurement Matters framework to the ABS, which will be updated every year. And they've given the ABS extra money to do a sort of expanded social survey every year, general social survey. And then Treasury are continuing to hold the Measurement Matters statement, which is the sort of analytical, political piece about the dashboard and the progress. And they'll put that out every 3 years is the program. So there's sort of 2 parts to it. There's the dashboard and there's the statement. And so, yeah, part of that's gone to the ABS, part of it's staying with Treasury.
Yes, I think those are fair points, Warwick. I would say, though, that there are 2 key structural issues which Treasury has given no sign of taking up. One is how we're going to build this into government and across government. And the second is there was a lot of statements from community groups about the need for a stronger community engagement program, not the short one that they did. So I think both of those things would continue to be fair criticisms of where the Treasury is at the moment.
Yeah, agreed. But they are also internally working on both those things. So we'll see where they get to with it.
That's good to hear, I think.
Thanks, Warwick. Thanks for that. And it could be great even to have a whole session really focused on the measuring what matters statements and where that's moving, and that would be a really interesting chat to put a focus on. Does anyone else have anything they want to throw in the mix before we have our guest speaker start? Not seeing any hands up, so I might go ahead and introduce Megan now. Megan Burkett is a fantastic leader in the wellbeing economy space, in my mind. She is the Executive Director for Ethical Fields, a recognised leader in community wealth building, place-based capital, which she'll be speaking about today, and natural capital in Australia. In addition to a slew of very impressive achievements over her career, she recently completed a 12-month national community wealth building tour where she visited over 30 communities across Australia to learn about and share community wealth building solutions. Since then, I've had the good fortune to participate in a nationwide place-based capital project that she's been leading over the last 12 months, 18, I can't think how long it's been a while. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome her to speak more about how capital systems can really build local economic ownership, control, inclusion, resilience and prosperity. Pass over now to Megan and we'll just get her sharing her slides as well.
Thanks so much, Saul. Thanks for the really kind introduction, and so lovely to connect with all of you. I'm a big fan and advocate for wellbeing economies. And yeah, like all of you, I'm sure, am kind of busy doing that in kind of my own way and in our own little space, and collectively that's all working together to create a bigger impact. So I will start sharing. Got a few slides for you today, so I'll just get those going. So we're all good. That's all good, Nod? Saul? Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you again. So I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're all joining from. Myself, that's Gumbaynggirr country, and particularly in the context of thinking about a concept such as place-based capital. So thinking about capital and how it can support First Nations people and the connection they have to kind of capital that goes way back thousands of years. So yeah, today I'm going to share with you our work around place-based capital. And in the context of a wellbeing economy, I would say that place-based capital is a very practical strategy and model that can help you to move towards the type of economy that you're looking for. Alrighty, so as Saul said, we've been working collaboratively with a network of places and partners on this topic for roughly around 5 years, but we've been doing that in a more focused way in the last 12 months through the Place-Based Capital Initiative and the Place-Based Capital Network. Saul and Warwick are both two members of our network. There might be some others in this group that I'm not aware of, but yeah, you already have two great contributors to this network. And you can see here some of those places that we've been working with really closely and some of those other partners. And today what I'm going to do is just share some of the key lessons and insights from this work that might inspire you in your own wellbeing economy work. Alrighty, so I kind of am going to take you through these sort of 4 key lessons that we've uncovered. So the first is really the importance of capital in transforming economic systems and how it can provide you with some really practical strategies and tools. The importance of creating a capital system that is in service of life as part of helping you to transform your economy to one that's in service of life. The big lesson that the foundations for this system already exist, which is really exciting. But the final one is the importance of actually really needing to work together intentionally and proactively to keep stepping towards a place-based capital system as part of a bigger economic system that's in service of life. So a little bit of background and context is that across Australia, of course, we know, we face some significant challenges and places we need to move to. So Warwick mentioned the sort of national tour, and we've had, hundreds of conversations with communities and everyday people across Australia about the challenges they face and the things that they're trying to address in their communities. And, some of the most common ones we heard about housing is a big viability of small businesses, shifting to more renewable and circular economies, more regenerative economies, addressing things like disadvantage. And I imagine, many of you are very familiar with these challenges and the need to really shift them as we move towards a better economy. Now, each of these challenges are really, quite unique and different, and how you address them will be a bit unique and different. But there's something that's really essential and common to all of these issues, and there's something that's really essential and common to how we transform our economy. And it's something that sits as a bit of a root cause of these issues, but is also going to be absolutely essential to solving them and that economic transformation. And where we've really focused around that commonality is capital. And capital being something that's essential, but also a root cause, as I said. So I guess in this context, broadly, kind of capital is often described as a resource or an asset that stores or provides benefit and value to people, sort of a broad capital definition. And of course, there's many different types of capital in the way people describe it. Of course, there's sort of, human capital and cultural capital and natural capital and all types of capital. But what we're doing, what's going on there? Let me bring that across to you. What we've been doing in our work is to focus really specifically on financial capital and capital assets. And the reason is that they're just so absolutely essential to shifting the game in the way that our current economy operates. So in this context, when we're thinking of financial capital, really the easiest way to think about it is we're talking about money. Of course, there's other things like credit and loans and other things that make up financial capital, but we're talking about money. And financial capital and money is so essential to resolving all of these issues and changing the way the economy functions. We need money to buy things, to build things, employ people, run things, maintain things. So, if you're thinking about changing our economy, we've absolutely got to change the way that money operates. But the other one, and I actually think more importantly, is capital assets. So capital assets in this context are really practical things. We're talking about land, natural resources, buildings, businesses being an asset, facilities, infrastructure, equipment, all those sort of physical, many tangible and some intangible things as well, like intellectual property and stuff like that. And the reason I think capital assets are almost more important when we're thinking about the way our economy operates is that capital assets actually generate money. That's where usually most of the money comes from, is these capital assets. But capital assets are just absolutely essential to our economy. You need land to build houses, to grow food. You need natural resources for, production. We need buildings for living, to run businesses, infrastructure for transport, hospitals, manufacturing. But why capital assets are so important is that assets provide value to communities and people, beyond just that direct use. Like, as I said, they generate revenue and income. They generate value over time. They provide opportunities for communities. They provide community uses. And they're just sort of things that provide security and capacity and resilience. So in this context, when we're talking about place-based capital, we're really focusing on financial capital, money, but also assets, all those things in your community. And yeah, I guess sorry, I'm using a little funny way of sharing where it's just grabbing a section of my screen and it keeps changing. So yeah, that first really important lesson, and I think for you when you're thinking about your wellbeing economy, is that capital is absolutely a critical part of our economic system. And if you want to transform the economic system, we've got to think about how we transform that capital system. So next key lesson we've sort of learned is really the importance of creating a local capital system that is in service of life, or, you know, doing what you want it to do. And, you know, in Australia, we are absolutely capital rich. You know, we have trillions of dollars. We are rich in land, we're rich in natural resources and buildings and infrastructure. But despite being so capital rich, we of course know that we've got a current capital system that doesn't empower most local places and people, and a capital system that really doesn't support, you know, an economy in service of life. And so, you know, ultimately, if we want to create an economy in service of life, we can't be indifferent about our capital system. We have to create a capital system that enables us to, you know, lead and to own and accelerate the economy that we want to see. So to do this, we've been working in our place-based capital program on a system of capital that's really created for local places and people by local places and people. And we've been working on this system of capital that's going to do what we need it to do. And we call it place-based capital, but you could call it by a different name. But we've found this to be something that sort of fits the need. So when we're referring to place-based capital, we're talking about a system of capital that serves a place or a region, a system of capital that empowers the people of that place, so individuals, families, local businesses, their employees, community organisations, you know, all the good people. We're talking about a system of capital that provides local people greater ownership and control of financial capital, but also capital assets, investment, development, and other capital activities. We're talking about a system that promotes local planning and decision-making and governance, that enables more local people to hold a financial and controlling share in local businesses and investments and assets. And really importantly, one that provides more inclusive and equitable opportunities for people to participate, and one that of course serves, you know, the ecological environment of that place as well. So that, you know, when we talk about that, it can sound a bit amorphous, and you might find the same thing, you know, when we talk about a wellbeing economy, it can sound a bit kind of amorphous. But really, what I love about place-based capital is it's a very practical thing. In its essence, really what we're talking about is, you know, it's about enabling places to identify and create sources of capital, to access and govern and manage the money that they need to do things, to invest in their community, to invest in local projects, in businesses, in community organisations, to be able to buy and own and use assets in the ways that you want to. And for you, that would be, of course, in service of life, to much more purposefully use your assets and to, you know, pull money together so you can do more with it. So we're talking about really practical things. The other thing to mention is that place-based capital, even though we call it place-based capital, it's very much about non-placed individuals participating as well. So it's very much about non-local stakeholders like government, developers, investors being part of that capital system. But they're investing and engaging in a way that still aligns with those principles that I just spoke to earlier. So a really practical example is something like household solar. So you think about household solar and how it shifts the game for an individual. That individual now has an asset on their roof. So instead of energy being a cost, They've now got an asset that they own on their roof. They're now generating their own energy. And if they generate more than they use, of course, they can receive a financial return from that. So something as simple as household solar is what we mean by place-based capital. You scale that up to a community example, and we look at, say, the town of Manila, where they've set up their own renewable energy company. They've now got their own renewable energy infrastructure and assets. And so they are now providing energy for their community. It's a community-owned company. So the people that own and control that energy company are the community. The people that earn the return from that energy company are the community. And they also received a $3 million grant from the government to set up a hydrogen project as well. So they're now co-investing with the government in their own energy scheme. So energy is a really great example because there's a lot happening, but place-based capital can be applied to any industry, any sector, but those are ones that you might be quite familiar with. So yeah, that next big lesson was we've got to create a capital system that is in service of life. So moving along, how are we doing this in the work that we're doing? Oh God, sorry, this is really annoying for you. So as I said, we're doing that through the Place-Based Capital Initiative and Network, so working together. And what we've been up to is to collaboratively scale place-based capital. So what that looks like is that we've been building this network of places and partners. We've been building awareness and inspiration and capability around what this looks like. We've been undertaking research into the enablers and what the system change required is. We've been working on really practical models and frameworks to help you do this, and identifying how to sort of start it up and scale it up. So the next key lesson then that we've found is that really the foundations for a place-based capital system already exist across Australia. So some of that looks like, what we know is that most of the places we've been speaking to, that's upwards of 100, are saying that a capital system like place-based capital is essential for their communities and really in demand. So the reasons for why they want it can vary, but they're all saying they would want something like a place-based capital system. What we've found is that, as I said, that kind of foundations already exist. So we've been able to identify more than 100 place-based capital solutions. By a solution, it could be a policy, a strategy, a structure, an initiative, or a vehicle that can enable what I'm talking about. And we've drawn those from hundreds of real life examples of this happening across Australia and across the world. And what that's shown us is that place-based capital is practical, is feasible and successful and impactful. So what we can see then is, you know, across Australia just alone, we've got these 300 cases of incidents of place-based capital happening. And alone, each of those often are just thought of like good news stories. It's like, oh, the local community buys the pub. Oh, that's great. Or, you know, oh, the local community set up a renewable energy scheme. So, you know, alone they're reported on in the news as like, oh, isn't this a good news story for this community? But what we've been able to show in the last 12 months and through this work is that these aren't just, you know, isolated incidences of good news story. This is actually a system of capital emerging across Australia. When you look at this in a systems change way, we can actually see that this is a model of capital that is happening right across Australia, that there's hundreds of incidences of it. And it's one that's really, as I said, kind of working for people. Just a couple of final little things and then I'll wrap up, is to say, even though we can see that there's this model of capital emerging and that communities are already actively moving in this way on their own, intuitively, as a more broad system and as a mainstream system, there are still really a lot of barriers for places. So, you know, we can see that most communities, most individuals really have limited awareness and capability of kind of engaging in these ways. Of course, there's a big, massive current capital deficit. Most of the capital sits in the hands of wealthy people. And so communities are trying to move in this direction, but with little capital to start from. They don't sort of have these tried and tested blueprints. So it's really easy if you want to go out there and set up a for-profit company. But if you want to go and set up something that's a bit more of a place-based capital, there's not this obvious clear pathway. You can't just call up the government and talk to the business advisor and say, how do I set up a place-based capital, fund? It's not as easy. And yet there aren't sort of more supportive guidances and resources and policies and infrastructure. But we say yet, there aren't these things yet, but we can see them starting to emerge. So the final kind of key lesson, I guess, that we've learned is, the importance of working together to actually really intentionally and proactively step towards a place-based capital system. So we know it's needed. We know that capital is absolutely essential in shifting our economy. We know that there's hundreds of solutions out there, but we actually need to really intentionally step towards them. And that's sort of where we're planning to go with the rest of the work in the place-based capital initiative. We're really wanting to advance those solutions that I've talked about. I said we've found 100 solutions, like readily available solutions of ways that you can move in this direction. But we want to get them in the hands of local communities, the hands of local people, so they exist. So when you've got a choice to make, you can choose a place-based capital solution opposed to, a for-profit solution that's not going to serve anyone. We're trying to help to figure out, what does the ecosystem look like? So if you actually have a place-based capital system operating across a whole place or operating across Australia, what does that look like? What is shifting? How are things changing? How are current stakeholders engaging differently? How's government engaging differently, philanthropy, etc.? We want to really try and progress a few priority solutions. So things that most communities want to see in their communities, we want to advance those. We want to help more communities engage with this. So we're currently working with 20, but we'd love to see, 100 communities getting out there and building a capital system that works for them, and really scaling that reach. So I'll stop there. I think I've gone well over time. Sorry, Saul, but I hope that was useful for everyone. Yeah.
That was amazing. Thank you, Megan. I know you stuck to the time limit absolutely perfectly. You showed that image of the map with all the intersecting lines, and the statement at the bottom, collectively they are the seeds of a new system. That sent a bit of a thrill up my spine, so thank you for that. I see, when we're trying to change the system, there's kind of adapting Joanna Macy's work that reconnects kind of model. There's kind of 3 focus areas that we can work on. There's practical examples, practical models. There's the cultural shift that needs to happen, and there's the institutional changes that are the kind of crystallization of the new culture. And in a way, I think a lot of the wellbeing economy work at this point in time is around the kind of the cultural thing about reframing what an economy is for, and changing that point on the map that we're trying to aim for. Broadening the conversation beyond GDP and trying to get really clear that the economy's purpose is well-being. It's not growth, and hopefully there's a trickle-down positive impact on well-being following that sometime later. And so sometimes it can feel a little bit academic or theoretical. And what I love about what you're doing is it is, as you said, it's so practical. It's part of the how we get to this new point on the map that we're busily trying to identify. So I'll open it up for questions. I see one's already come in, and it was going to be my question for you as well, which is how other people can stay in touch with this work and learn more about the examples that you've identified. Is there something that you can share there?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, really happy to share. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yeah, that's the main link. Really happy to share an email address. I'll do that in just a second so you can stay in touch. But also just to say, so ethical fields are sort of helping to corral it all. But it's very much a collective network, and everything that we've created, the intention is that there's no sort of hold on the IP. We want it all to be open source. Our goal is to get this out into the hands of communities so they can act on it. And so, if you know anyone, if you've got any, if you're based in one of those places, I would encourage you to connect with whoever the representatives are in the place and see what's happening at that place level. And yeah, we're absolutely really happy to share the 100 solutions, share the case studies. And, you know, for those, we're trying to build and enhance that resource. You know, at the moment we have the 100 solutions, but what we find is that most people still don't quite fully understand what all of them are. So, you know, one example is like a community development corporation. It's a really practical thing that many places have already set up, but others are like, well, what's a community development corporation? How does it work? So yeah, really happy to connect with anyone, happy to share the resources. And yeah, would love to lean on all of you to keep helping us to advance those resources. Yeah.
I might let people, oh, there's another question that's come in. I can read that out for you, Gio, if you like. Otherwise, feel free to ask that yourself.
Oh, yeah, do you want to read it out? Is it in the chat? I can open it.
Yes.
I had it closed, but I can.
Megan, thanks, Megan. Very interesting. Do you see differences between different communities in terms of the inequities that exist between different places? For example, Indigenous communities compared to white, wealthy communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, massive inequities across all communities. And I think that's what's so great about place-based capital as a model. So as a model, it's a broad model, and it's got some key common principles that you can apply. But then when it comes to the solutions, it's about picking what's needed in each place. And it's about the place, you know, deciding what solutions do they need, what are their local capital needs, what are their local capital aspirations, and therefore what types of capital structures, vehicles, policies do they need that are going to help direct them towards that. In terms of Aboriginal communities, I think what's great about place-based capital is that it already aligns in many ways with, not all, you can't speak for all and generalise for Aboriginal groups, but it does align often with some Aboriginal, you know, kind of values in terms of having that sort of more stewardship and ownership over infrastructure and, you know, sort of collective decision making and things like that. So yeah, that's what's great. And I guess I talked about the practicality of it, is that each place can create that local capital system that's going to work for their needs. Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. Esther's written in a question as well, which is quite interesting because I know being part of that, the program, there were a lot of examples that were quite regional, but the differences that you've witnessed between urban and more regional or remote areas.
Yeah, totally. So I guess what I'd say is, you know, place-based capital is for all places. As I said, it can be completely adapted. What we do find is that you can get some more promotion of sort of clear place-based capital case studies from regional places, because you often get sort of, you know, communities that are clearly defined but as a community trying to work together to address their local issues. You know, so you've got heaps of examples like that Manila one where they've set up their renewable energy scheme. You've got the Yakandanda community that bought their local petrol station, and now they control their own fuel and, you know, and make hundreds of thousands of dollars off that a year. You've got, you know, local communities investing in their own, you know, all different sorts of things, housing issues. But absolutely, you see that in metro spaces as well. And I guess it kind of comes down to, well, how do you define place and how do you define community and who's coming together around this? And, you know, place in a city can be defined however you want it to, but it's about bringing together the people and connecting them into the place. And that's where the boundary makes sense. And in that way, you can apply it broadly. So we do see place-based capital rolling out in cities all the time. We see that happening at a kind of council level. We see that happening where you've got communities coming together around common issues, maybe, you know, collective housing, coming around urban food systems and wanting to create better systems around urban food systems of land and capital. But we also see, you know, more place-based capital solutions rolling out at a state and national scale. So we've been working on a fund model where you have a fund in every place, and in a city level that could be, say, at a council, regional council scale. And those funds are supported and connected by a national mutual fund. For those of you that aren't familiar with mutuals, they're a bit like a cooperative, but it's when you think about banks and finance, you might use a mutual. And so that's a way where you can still have a fund, a finance fund, grounded in place, grounded in the community of that place, but connected and supported by a state or national scheme that is there and owned by those places. So you can see this thread then of place and local people, but being connected through national schemes. Yeah, thanks, Saul.
Thanks, Megan. I've heard place-based capital referred to as the deglobalization of capital, which I thought was quite an interesting term. And whether or not you agree with that framing, the idea that capital is deglobalized in the sense that it's available locally, I suppose the way it's then employed is going to depend very much on what the local needs are.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I think when we think about capital assets, money is a bit of a different beast because, money can flow and move. But when you think about capital assets, those practical things I talked about, land, buildings, infrastructure, who owns them, who controls them, how they're used, resource as well as another critical thing. It has to be connected to place, and it has to be connected to the community of that place. We, of course, do need, state and national systems that ensure that, each collectively it's working together. And we're, of course, part of a bigger global system, and there needs to be global sharing and global connection. And but I think we've absolutely got to, reconnect things like our assets back to place, back to people, and back to the people that are most relevant to those assets. And that's the people that use them, rely on them, Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Jane's had her hand up for a little while, and then I'll go after that to Sally Fisher's question, and then we might decide whether we want to wrap up there and open it up to broader wellbeing economy discussion. It's been fantastic. So, Jane, do you want to unmute your mic?
Sure. Thanks, Sol. Thanks, Megan. I was just wondering if there's much red tape or, regulatory barriers in setting up some of these things.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess when we talk about the 100 solutions, for the most part, most of them are already possible in Australia, but there are a small handful of solutions that have come from international places that there may not necessarily be the kind of regulatory framework for it that we might need. So some definitely might need some regulatory or legislative shifts. And then there's kind of a whole bunch of others that have been successfully set up. But what we find, Jane, is that, like I said, because they're not currently the mainstream models or the mainstream solutions, they're being set up by, passionate individuals or passionate entrepreneurs, passionate communities that want to take that path. Warwick, has his own great example in Castlemaine of the Castlemaine Community Investment Co-op, if that's what it's called, Warwick, and you can share more on this, Warwick. But my understanding is that they're having to navigate, tax law. They're having to navigate, co-op law, and they want to do some particular things with debentures. But the question is, well, can that be done? And has that then been done before? What are the tax implications? And so what we find is that communities going down this route, they're kind of having to do a bit of trial and error, and they're having to kind of forge the path. But once they've figured it out, it's excellent, and that's what's going to happen in Castlemaine. There's going to be a great blueprint for another community. But it is going to take a little bit of that in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. It's going to take people being willing to kind of get it wrong, cycle back, get it right, and then, figure out. And it is going to need absolutely, at some points, potentially regulatory changes. If Australia wanted to pursue a place-based capital system, state and federal governments absolutely right now could enact policy and legislation that supports a place-based capital system. I would love to see, and I have been trying to get the ear of Albanese, of Chalmers. I have got a meeting with Minister King, well, the policy advisor, maybe at some point the minister, yeah, to talk about the benefits and the need for policy around place-based capital as a way to drive us towards the wellbeing economy that we want. Warwick, did you want to add any tidbits on, yeah, that experience of navigating regulation, legislation, and what you've been up to?
Yeah, sure. Maybe super briefly. I mean, it's the sort of arrangement we're trying to set up in Castlemaine, which is a cooperative that buys real estate and permanently removes it from the speculative market. It is using a sort of non-distributing cooperative, but is taking investment from the community. We're not allowed to call it investment. It's essentially, the community are lending the cooperative money. So it's a non-distributing cooperative, but we're borrowing money from the community in order to be able to buy these properties, take them off the market, manage them for the community, and give nobody an interest in their speculative value. So we don't want the community members who are investing to have an interest in that speculative value, because then, you know, they're just playing the game as well. And so the law has allowed this to happen for quite a long time, but nobody's actually done it before. And so, you know, as you can imagine, engaging lawyers to go through the debenture offers and make sure it aligns with the law is all new. We're breaking new ground. And so it's sort of very intensive in terms of the time we've got to spend and the money with lawyers, even though they're giving us good rates. Yeah, it's taking a lot longer than we thought it would, but luckily our first purchase, the building, the owners have taken it off the market, and they're waiting for us to get our act together before they yeah, so we've got longer than we thought we had.
Yeah,
very exciting. Well done. A couple of comments from two different Sallys. Sally from New Zealand. Thanks all, great mahi. I don't know what mahi is. That's a Kiwi term, obviously. Great chat, maybe. And Sally Fisher, just a question for you. We'll make this the last one. Have philanthropic orgs engaged with this concept so far? If so, which ones? And I suppose I'll add on to that as well, Megan, whether that opens up any requests from you of this group at all.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Saul. So yeah, philanthropic groups really interested. So we've been talking to the Paul Ramsay Foundation. So they've got their own initiative around community-led fund managers. And I would say that's a place-based capital solution, you know, setting up local community-led fund managers and investing in that. Also another one, Siddle Family Foundation. So they're very interested. And they're kind of really interested to think about how place-based capital can shift incomes and shift housing solutions for local everyday people. And I guess, yeah, I mean, what I'd just say for all of you is that, you know, in your everyday work, when you're in the WEAll Alliance, it's, yeah, you're having to think about the big strategy of it and, you know, coming together around the collective visions and things. But what's wonderful about place-based capital is it kind of gives you practical on the ground solutions. So in your everyday work, if you're having to make a choice, just as an individual, you know, what are you going to do with your money? Where are you going to spend it? Could you invest it somewhere? Would you put solar on your roof? Would you invest in a local co-op like Warwick setup? You know, so thinking about you as an individual, what are you doing with your money? What are you doing with the capital that you own? As a community or in your organization, you know, how is your community functioning? What can you do as a community to shift the way that capital operates, shift who owns it, shift who controls it? And then, yeah, I guess in your different organizations, in the choices that you're making every day, you know, if you get an opportunity in the work that you do, could you make a place-based capital choice and slightly just shift that in the direction that that's going? Or is your organisation one, or maybe you work for a council or whatever it might be, potentially you could have a policy or a strategy around place-based capital depending on who you are. So yeah, really happy to share those solutions, but yeah, just practical things you can do.
Thanks, Megan. I've just added your email address into the chat. I hope that's okay. That's a great way to get back in touch with Megan if you have further information you'd like to know about the work that she's doing and the work that Ethical Fields is doing. Thanks so much. It's been absolutely fantastic. We didn't intend for the Q&A to go on for so long, but obviously everyone's really excited and engaged in the topic. We've got 6 minutes left, and I thought it could be a good chance to bring up anything outside of place-based capital in the wellbeing economy movement. I can see Mike's already jumped in with his hand up there, so I'll hand over to you, Mike.
Sorry, Saul, I was trying to get this in Megan's session because there were two philanthropic organisations that Megan may have approached, but I know are interested. One is the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation in Melbourne. They are doing that sort of work in Victoria. And the other is I think it's called the WEAll Foundation, the Rural and Regional Bodies. You may have approached them, but they are also very interested in local economy.
FRRR Foundation for Regional Renewal.
So,
yeah, thanks, Mike. We have approached FRRR about a year ago, but we're going back to them again. Haven't connected with the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, so should. And yeah, I guess as just a bit of a plug, the work over the last 12 months was funded by local places themselves. So all of the places you saw on that map chipped in like $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, whatever they could. And we aggregated that to have a very small pot of money to do the work that you've heard us talking about. That funding's now run up, and so we're now seeking funding to do that next big aspirational work that we had. So if anyone's connected to funders or investors that would really love to see this work continue, then love to be connected with them and talk about that further. Thanks for that little plug. Yeah.
I'll look at that comment from Warwick. That's great. Now we've got 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any other comments or things that you'd like to alert this group to? Or any suggestions for a guest speaker for our next call? We have 6 different principles in our charter. So dignity, that everyone has enough to live in comfort, safety and happiness. I won't go into that, actually the subtext. Dignity, nature, purpose, fairness, participation and First Nations. And so far we've had Catherine speak to us at the opening session, essentially around that principle of purpose. And we had Susan speak to us at the last call, I think really around fairness, around she gave an analysis of the budget from a future generations perspective, and whether it was sort of built on fairness and intergenerational fairness. Megan, today, I think place-based capital, it probably touches on all of them. For me, it's really strongly touches on participation and the idea that locals actually have ownership and then therefore an ownership stake, which is a controlling stake. They get to actively participate in their economy. So we haven't yet really touched much on dignity, nature or First Nations. So if anyone has a suggested speaker on any of those areas, nature, whether it's around natural capital type discussions or the work that's going on in the nature repair market bill or anything around that. Likewise, First Nations would be fantastic to have a speaker. If anyone has any suggestions there, please shout it out, stick it in the chat, or get in touch with the, thanks Esther, get in touch with the WEAll Australia email address, which Esther's just put in the chat there, info@weallaustralia.org.au. And I'm opening it up now for any last comments or things that anyone might want to alert us to. Warwick.
Thanks. At risk of speaking too much, just wanted to let people know that the Castlemaine Institute, one of my other hats, have recently produced an economic development strategy for Mount Alexander Shire Council on wellbeing economy principles. So, you know, it's quite a radical move for a local regional council to take that sort of approach to economic development. It goes before council next month for approval, but it looks like, you know, all the ducks are lined up. Everybody's approving of the strategy. So I'll share that when it's formally approved and published. Yeah, it's sort of exciting news for us. And you know, we've got lots of federal action, we've got lots of state and territory action. Nice to have some sort of direct local government application of wellbeing economy principles too.
Great work, Warwick.
And Warwick, was that something that was initiated by did you say Mount Alexander?
Yeah, Mount Alexander Council. So they were inspired actually by sort of work that's happening at Regen Melbourne along donut economics lines, and they kind of wanted to align their economic development strategy with the Sustainable Development Goals, and you know, just through conversations with us and that relationship building, sort of decided in the end that a wellbeing economy approach was the right one. But yes, kudos to council for thinking differently to start with.
Excellent. Good suggestion there as well from Megan on natural capital environmental markets. And Lisa Barker, the right to name, the meeting point. I'm not sure what that is, but I might click on that link. We probably need to wrap up this meeting. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Oh, Lisa, did you want to quickly say something quickly on the meeting points?
Oh, hi, everyone. No, I was just going to say I became aware of this organisation very recently, and it's about bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous people together to develop allyship. And I don't know anyone in it at this stage, but it might be an interesting one for you guys to look at in terms of having someone talk to the group.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing. All right, well, I better wrap it up. Thanks so much. We managed to get through quite a bit in 1 hour, and we've kept it nice and punchy. And thanks very much, Megan, for joining us. Really appreciate it. It was fantastic. See you all.
Yeah.
Bye.